Of Blood and Steel, written by Seymour Zainali, narrated by James Lawrence. Chapter 14. In the Grip. A yellow beam flickered through the leaves as the forest canopy thinned. Balak narrowed his eyes. The sun was high in the sky, and no matter which direction he turned, its rays blasted against his eyelids. Balak shivered and pulled his cloak onto his shoulders. He breathed heavily, and a puff of white steam formed a cloud escaping from his mouth and rising into the air. He rubbed his hands together and sighed. He stretched out a finger and pointed west. Arda followed the direction of his arm with her eyes, and she noticed the peaks of a gray structure in the distance. "It seems our journey's almost at an end," she indicated, curling her lips to one side. Only open fields of green and gold stood between the travelers and their destination. There were no trees or mountains to hide in now. They were unprotected, exposed. Arda's teeth began to chatter uncontrollably. "We should make it before nightfall." Balak started walking over the crisp green grass and toward their destination. "Let's hope we have enough time. The assassin could soon be hot on our trail." "We should move fast," Balak agreed. Arda shuffled her feet and pushed through the icy blades of grass. She pulled her hood over her ears and draped the furs she'd been using as a blanket for the duration of their journey over her shoulders. She screwed up her nose. The furs smelled moist, as if they'd been soaked and unable to dry. Regardless, she tied the ribbon around her neck and tugged it across her front to keep the child warm. They walked for several hours across open fields without seeing a soul. At last, they approached some fields of crops and a small compound of goats and chickens. They passed a small farmhouse, and Arda exchanged some coin for some bread and a small piece of white cheese. The farmer's wife invited them in for a warm drink and some soup. Balak thanked her, but refused. "We have a long journey ahead," he told her. Arda thanked the farmer and his wife for their kindness. The two set off again across the open fields. "I want to cover as much ground as possible," he told Arda. "Looks like a storm is brewing." As they continued to travel, the day became overcast. Dark clouds filled the sky. A few large, icy droplets splashed on Balak's cheek, and a few minutes later there were more. Although the rainfall was sparse, the drops were harsh and heavy, causing a tingling sensation on his skin. The chilly breeze grew in strength and pushed against them as they walked toward the dreary structure. Arda's cheeks were pink, and she was breathing heavily. "There's a path that leads us down to the iron gates just up here," Balak gasped. "Good." That was all Arda could muster. Her feet felt heavy and raw. She turned her head to the left and peered over her shoulder. They'd walked for kilometers, and even the farmhouse was nowhere in sight now. It was almost sundown when they reached the shelter of a few trees and bushes at the top of an incline. Arda skipped forward with a smile, but it soon faded as Balak grabbed her arm with a tight grip. Her eyes judged his face, and she followed his line of sight. "We are too late. It's surrounded," she gasped. "How are we going to get inside?" At the foot of the incline surrounding the whitewashed castle, a large army of men was building fires and setting up camp. "Late. It looks like they've just gotten here. The fun's yet to begin," Balak whispered. "Fun is not really the word I would use." "That was a joke. I don't think you understand my sense of humor." "Try to be honest. I don't think you have a sense of humor. What should we do?" "We should wait it out," Balak said. "Out here? We'll be much safer inside. Besides, who knows who's prowling around here? This is about to be a battleground, and we certainly don't want to be caught in the crossfire." "And yet
The Iron Gate's castle is said to be impenetrable."
Arda protested.
"And what if that assassin catches up with us again? There's no question that we will be safer inside. The only questions we should be asking right now are how and when to get inside."
The two fell silent, and rain began to drop heavily. It lashed the ground in front of them and the leaves above their heads. They crouched down and squeezed between some bushes as thunder rolled through the sky above them, displaying the occasional flicker of blue. Arda sat under the protection of a large bush to feed the child milk and then changed her. Balak sat beside her. She pulled out the bread and cheese and offered Balak half. He shoveled it into his mouth before she had even broken her bread. She tipped the dregs of her water flask into her mouth before eating her portion. The bread was dry now and quite crisp to bite. The cheese was strong and bitter, but she quite liked it, as it reminded her of being home in the castle. Balak drank some water from his flask before offering it to Arda.
"Thank you."
She gulped down the water to wash down the dry bread. Balak rose to his feet.
"Any idea if there's another way in, other than through the gates, I mean?"
he asked.
"No, not that I know of."
"Stay here and rest. I'll scope it out."
The light was fading fast. Most of the sun was gone, and what remained was glowing a dull orange. Balak hurried out of sight, just below the crest of the incline. He scanned the castle's surroundings, but the invading army was everywhere, erecting tents and constructing siege ladders, towers, battering rams, and trebuchets. Balak scrambled closer, remaining out of sight. Soldiers stood guard at every point, next to large green tents. Balak slowly climbed up the incline, trying to stay out of sight. Getting back was much trickier, but he hurriedly returned to Arda as fast as he possibly could.
"It's impossible. They're constructing their war equipment. I don't like this, Arda. I don't want to be there when the trebuchets start firing," he told her.
"Balak, we must try. Is the only way in through the front gates?"
"Yes, but how do you expect to make it through the enemy camp alive? We'll be slaughtered," Balak snapped.
"If you can get us there, I know Lord Anzor will help us. In fact, people will call him King Anzor the Noble."
"And did he give himself that nickname?"
"No, I don't know. So is sitting here waiting to be picked off by either a bounty hunter or a soldier any better? Besides, I heard they serve the best ale in all of Tartarus."
"Yeah, the one that makes you go blind, yeah, so I've been told. Fine,"
Balak scowled. Arda grinned, relishing the small victory. The thick, impenetrable walls were a safe bet, but Balak was not convinced they could get inside without being noticed.
"We'll move under the black of night, when most of them are sleeping. Then we'll only have the night guard to deal with,"
Balak said. Arda settled down and took her rest. Balak sipped water and watched the camp. The camp was loud for the first part of the night, but then it quieted. The night guards stayed focused and manned their posts. Balak waited until there were just a few watchmen remaining and one man tending the fire before he woke Arda.
"Arda, we need to move. Follow me."
He led her down through the bushes and into the enemy camp. The stench of stale ale and smoke filled the air. Arda made certain the child's face was covered as they slowly headed between tents and the loud snores of men. They crept from one tent to the next in silence. They took each step slowly and cautiously as they weaved their way through the camp. Balak halted suddenly and looked from side to side.
Are we lost?"
Arda whispered.
"Just give me a moment."
He looked around.
"The gates are over there, but we need to make it to the wall unnoticed, then move along to the entrance. This way."
He pointed. He stepped backward, but
as he turned, his foot struck a stockpile of long sticks that were leaning against one of the tents, causing them to fall.
Shit!
"Over there!" he heard a guard shout as several footsteps padded toward them. "Guard the general!"
Stay low.
He grabbed Arda's arm and ran alongside a tent. The quick footsteps got closer. Balak listened. 1, 2, 4, 7.
There are 8 men coming.
He looked inside an empty tent. It was filled only with logs for the fire.
In here.
They headed to the back and crouched down, trying to hide behind the firewood. "Something ran over there. There was a shadow. Assassin, I think," he heard one of the men yell.
Check in there,
commanded another. A soldier entered the tent and looked around. Balak was poised with his axe, ready to strike. The soldier spotted Balak first. Then he looked across to Arda. He was young, and his sword hand shook. He took a step backward rather than forward. His eyes widened, but he did not raise the alarm. Arda waved at Balak to lower his axe. "Stand down," she whispered. The pale soldier stared at her, and she smiled. She looked down and realized the child was exposed. "Please," she whispered, "just leave, and we will too." He nodded once and started to take steps back toward the curtain. His eyes remained fixated in Balak's direction. Another soldier opened the curtain.
Well?
"Nothing in here but firewood." He closed the curtain slowly. "Maybe it was just an animal," he suggested to the others. They waited for a while until the footsteps disappeared in the distance. Arda sighed and blew a wisp of hair that had been tickling her nose. Balak crept to the door and peered out before summoning Arda.
"Let's get out of here. That was too close."
Balak and Arda stayed slow and silent as they headed for the wall. They gently shuffled their feet along and moved carefully. They kept low as both edged along, unnoticed. The child began to squirm and cough. Arda bounced and shushed her. "She's getting hungry," she warned.
"Keep her quiet. We're almost there."
They edged along the walls, with watchmen only several meters away. They were just a few meters from the entrance when the child began to cry. At first, they stood still as the watchmen started to look around for the source of the sound.
"Calm her down,"
Balak muttered through gritted teeth. "I can't," Arda said, looking panicked.
"They're looking in our direction. Can't you use magic?"
Arda narrowed her eyes and stared at Balak. "I already told you that magic doesn't work on blue bloods. We'll have to run." Arda managed to calm the child with some milk, but the hunt was on. "She's still thirsty, Balak. Think fast. What do we do?" Guards had started gathering outside. Some were saying the noise was coming from inside the castle, while others were searching outside the walls. The disturbance caught the attention of the soldiers inside the castle, too, and they started to look down from the walls. Balak noticed some rocks on the ground, and he picked them up.
"As soon as I throw these, we run for the gates."
"What if they don't let us in?"
"Let's just hope they do."
One of the guards above in the castle had spotted them and readied the archers. Balak and Arda could see them pulling arrows from their quivers and loading their bows, ready to strike. Balak had to make a move. It was only a matter of time before the enemy soldiers noticed them too. He stretched his arm out behind him and swung his hand over his shoulder, launching the rocks as far as he could. The rocks flew through the air and went crashing down just behind one of the tents. "Over there!" one of the soldiers shouted, and they all ran in twos toward the sound. Balak and Arda made their move and ran toward the entrance to the iron gates. It didn't take long for one of the remaining soldiers in the camp to notice the shadowy figures running toward the gate. He blew a horn that echoed through the camp.
Soldiers started to rise out of their beds, and they lit their torches. As the lights grew brighter, Arda and Balak were exposed by their orange glow.
"This way! Don't let 'em get away!"
the soldier yelled. The soldiers started closing in. Those from the camp moved closer to the wall, and the others changed direction and started to charge in Balak and Arda's direction.
"Help us!"
Arda yelled to the soldiers in the Iron Gates castle.
"We seek refuge!"
The soldiers were gaining on them as they arrived at the gates.
"They're going to kill us," Balak yelled. "Let us in."
The soldiers spoke among themselves. Their archers stepped forward and pulled arrows from their belt quivers. They fired around toward their enemy and then stepped back.
"How do we know you're not spies?"
yelled one of the soldiers.
"Do your enemies kill their own spies? They're coming for us. Look!"
Balak gestured toward the soldiers that now surrounded them in every direction. There was no escape.
"Please, hurry!"
Arda opened her cloak and showed the child.
"They will murder us!"
"Let us in!"
Balak yelled.
"We have a child with us. Will you let them kill the child along with us?"
Arda pleaded. The archers stepped forward and fired another round at the gaining soldiers. Their arrows struck several men who fell to the ground instantaneously. When they stepped back again, the other soldiers threw down a ladder made of rope and wood.
"About time. Climb, Arda,"
Balak instructed as 3 soldiers approached. He fought them off with his fists as Arda scrambled up the ladder. The ladder twisted and swung from side to side. She pushed up the ladder, the child and her satchel across her body, and she carried her staff. Her feet dangled and she almost slipped, but she gripped tightly and pushed on.
"Balak, come on!"
Balak pulled out his axe and swung it fiercely. Arda was up the ladder now, so he jumped onto it and clambered up as fast as he could, taking 2 rungs at a time. At the bottom, the enemy soldiers shook the ladder. Arda was almost at the top, and Balak was not far behind. More men approached, and they started up the ladder at speed behind Arda and Balak. The men on the castle wall helped her over the top, and as soon as Balak was over, Arda yelled, "Cut the rope!" Balak swung his axe, and with one swoop the ladder was free. The loose ropes fell, along with several enemy soldiers. Arda covered her ears as several soldiers plummeted to their deaths. Balak slumped to the ground beside Arda and exhaled. He laid down his axe and rubbed his head with his large hand. Feet moved toward him as the archers shot one last round at the camp. Arda nudged him with her elbow, and as he looked up, his gaze was met with several shining swords. They were surrounded. Again. He sighed.
"Not exactly the welcome we were looking for."